ਚੱਕਦੇ ਟੀਵੀ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਵਿੰਦਰ ਤੂਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਪੱਟ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਅੱਜ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਟੋਰਾਂਟੋ ਤੋਂ NDP ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਮਾਰਟਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਜੁੜਨਗੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ TPP ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕਾਫੀ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਚਰਚਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟਰਾਂਸ ਪੈਸੀਫਿਕ ਪਾਰਟਨਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡੀਲ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਸ 'ਤੇ ਸਾਈਨ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਊਗਾ। ਪਰ ਕੱਲ ਰਾਤ ਅੱਜ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਇਹ ਨਿਊਜ਼ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਕਿ TPP 'ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ 12 ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। 12 ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੇ ਲਿਸਟ ਦੇਖੀ ਜਾਵੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਲੰਬੀ ਲਿਸਟ ਆ। ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ, ਬਰੂਨਾਈ, ਚਿਲੀ, ਮੈਕਸੀਕੋ, ਮਲੇਸ਼ੀਆ, ਪੇਰੂ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਅਤੇ USA, ਸਿੰਗਾਪੁਰ, ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਨੇ, ਜਾਪਾਨ ਵਰਗੇ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਨੂੰ ਕਈ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਕਾਫੀ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ। ਕਈ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਸ ਸਮਝੌਤੇ ਦੀ ਤਿੱਖੀ ਆਲੋਚਨਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਆ। ਮਾਰਟਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਟਰਾਈ ਟੂ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ TPP ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਟੈਂਡ ਆ NDP ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦਾ, ਉਸ ਦਾ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਿਰੋਧ ਕਿਉਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਫਸਟ ਆਫ ਆਲ, ਮਿਸਟਰ ਮਾਰਟਨ ਸਿੰਘ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Praji. It's very nice to be back with you again.
Okay, let's start about TPP. Like before a few days, it was in the news that Stephen Harper's Conservative Party of Canada, represented by Ed Fast, who's not running in this federal election, was representing Canada in USA, and they were negotiating the deal called TPP, which can be historical, the biggest agreement we ever had in terms of the trade agreement so far. Please tell us why NDP took a stand to oppose this deal before even looking into that.
Well, the problem that we have with the deal, Paji, is that no one knows what's in it, or at least they didn't know what was in it until this very morning. And so what you have is a situation where you are quite right, that it's the largest trade deal that we've ever signed, and in fact I think it's the largest trade deal ever signed in the entire history of the world, but yet we don't know anything that's in it. So since this morning, what has happened is that we've come to learn that already, even before day one of the deal is completed, the taxpayers of Canada are on the hook for $4.3 billion. And this is happening because the government says it's going to have to compensate, among others, dairy and egg and poultry farmers, as well as the auto sector, because these particular industries are going to be profoundly negatively affected in this particular deal. And this is an absolute tragedy for our area here in Brampton and Peel region, very near to the border of my riding of Brampton North. We have the Chrysler plant. And Unifor itself says that we're expecting 26,000 auto worker jobs to be lost alone. And so while certainly it's a big deal, while it certainly includes a lot of countries, we know in the NDP that the net job creation from this is going to be negative, and the net dollar impact for Canadians is also going to be negative.
We heard some industry views. I think some people came from, especially from the pork industry, especially from the cranberry farms, especially from the other sectors too. And even the stock markets, dollar is going up, stock market actually like that deal. And let's talk about individual industries. I think NDP has a concern about the dairy industry. Thomas Mulcair was in Quebec and was saying that dairy farmers shouldn't be put on hold. And we got the numbers now. 10% only Canada's market were exposed to the outside competition, 90% were protected. And now we're getting the numbers that only 3.25% will be exposed to the country like New Zealand or USA. So, and if Prime Minister said the farmers are going to suffer, then we are going to subsidize them. We have a certain means, we will bring some money to help those farmers. Now farmers were throwing the milk, they're spilling the milk in front of Parliament. Some of farmers like this deal too. They already bent back. Now, can you tell me, still you are arguing that it's not good for the dairy products or dairy market or dairy farmers?
So what it is, for those of our viewers who are unfamiliar, in Canada we have a system called supply management. And supply management manages the amount of milk and eggs and poultry produced so that the amount produced as best as possible can match the market needs. And what we do also with supply management is we ensure the safety of the food products coming out of those particular agricultural sectors. And so this deal puts that whole thing at risk. When we talk about the percentage of the market that's going to be opened up, you can imagine the amount of difficulty that's going to be had on behalf of these farmers if already they know that it's going to be $4.3 billion in help that they're going to have to provide. I mean, this is not a small amount of money. And so this is why still the New Democratic Party is saying this is not at all a good deal, and we feel that it's going to have a net negative impact for the Canadian economy overall.
But here, if we look at the Liberal Party, they said that we don't have the facts and figures yet, so they don't want to comment. So why NDP is just jumping into it? Why they can't just wait till all the details are out in the media, out in front of everyone, so they can verify those details and then comment on anything?
So the details that we're commenting on are the ones that we have already. The $4.3 billion is not a number that was come up with by the New Democratic Party. This number was in fact shared with us by the government's own spokespeople. And so we can tell you that if the government's own spokespeople are sharing with us a number, then it's going to be at least this bad. In addition to that, we know from Stephen Harper, when he announced about 10 days ago to about 14 days ago, that in fact the auto sector was not going to be at all happy with this deal. Once that happened, the auto sector started looking into the plan itself to see what the issues were, and that's where they came up with their number of 26,000 job losses. So it's not as though the New Democratic Party is operating without numbers or bringing up numbers itself. We are going to the government's own numbers and those industry analysts within inside the auto sector to get us the numbers we need for the analysis that we put forward.
Well, as you mentioned, the auto sectors, the numbers we're coming, I think we were fearful that there will be, because 60% products, I think, should be made, like should have a Canadian content. Now, Stephen Harper has promised that we negotiated, and he promised that we didn't negotiate less than 40% content. Are you satisfied with that or not?
Well, the satisfaction level is something that can be talked about, but I mean, let's take a look at who else is complaining about the auto sector in this deal. It's not just Canada who has its concerns that are being put forth. For example, Mexico had deep concerns about the auto sector, and their labor costs and other costs are significantly less than ours. So if Mexico thinks that their auto sector is at risk, you can imagine how deeply at risk our auto sector is, with our pay rates being much higher.
So let's say some numbers are out. I think we were saying the numbers were not out. Did you change your stand yet, or there is no change at all?
No, there's no chance of us changing our stance at this point. I mean, beyond that, we're also concerned about the fact that pharmaceutical drugs are going to be having their patent rates increased. It's important to know that patent rates for drugs were increased through the Brian Mulroney period and also the Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien period, and that's why our drug costs are among the highest in the world. We in our platform with the New Democratic Party want to implement a national pharmacare program, and with that national pharmacare program we would in fact decrease the cost of drugs. This deal puts this at risk. And so the fact of the matter is that the deal is not good for Canada, neither on an economic basis, neither on a social justice or social program basis.
I know that you have a pharma background, and you mentioned about the pharma, especially the copyright issues or some of the patent issues. So what will happen if the deal has already been completed, and few of the sources were saying that there were some issues based on the pharma issues. So what exactly would the outcome of this?
So what it means an increase in cost for drugs. For those of our viewers who are unfamiliar, brand name drugs in Canada are priced in a very arbitrary manner. What Canada does on the government level is they take the 7 most expensive countries and they take the average of that number, and that becomes our brand name drug price. And so what it means is for any increase in patent length, it means that that hugely expensive drug cost gets to continue on, and we're all the ones paying for it, ultimately, because many of the provincial insurance programs are funded by the taxpayer, whether it's at the federal level or the provincial level. And so what happens is that we're basically privatizing profit, which is what the Conservatives do, and making debt or the costs go as part of the public domain, meaning that the taxpayer has to pick up the cost of that change in policy.
By talking so tough, what we telling to the other 11 countries? Are we pro-trade or not?
Well, that's the question. I mean, the New Democratic Party itself is in favor of fair trade. In fact, there was a trade deal signed with South Korea a number of years earlier, and we hailed that deal. We said that that deal was in fact, well negotiated, and also was supported by both the people of South Korea and the people of Canada, because overall it benefited both nations and helped create jobs. The deals here, how can we even express to other countries whether it's pro-trade or not when we don't know what the contents are? I would argue that those people and those nations as well don't know fully what the details are also, because if they did, we would be able to glean or learn from their news and media systems that the details that they're being expressed to them are not being expressed to us.
But Mr. Singh, when we do some business or when we make a trade, it's always a give and take. You think Canada has given up a lot instead of getting some more back?
Well, the thing is this. We are not being shared any numbers, or no numbers are being shared with us about what the benefits are going to be in terms of, net economic benefit. What's being shared with us is that we're going to have a net economic loss of $4.3 billion to the taxpayer. So when that's being shared with us openly and publicly, and the entire process itself has been cloaked in secrecy, it begs the question what else lies within the details that we haven't learned yet. It's deeply concerning to me, and it's really begs the question, why were we not made aware of the contents of the deal as they're being negotiated, so the various industry sectors that were going to be negatively impacted could, act appropriately and, brace themselves.
There is a statement from Mr. Harper today morning itself. It says that if any other party is elected, they should not scrap this deal. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly he's saying that because we have already promised that if we're elected, we're definitely not going to go ahead with the deal. So I can understand his concern. But the fact of the matter is that they have, in effect, negotiated in bad faith. They have kept Canadians in the dark on this. And in fact, would it be any shock that Canadians would not be happy with the deal and want it scrapped should another party come to power? And so not only would I say is that our position that the deal should be scrapped, in fact, I would argue that we have an obligation and a responsibility to Canadians to get rid of this trade deal.
But same is the case with other countries and other countries' people as well. They don't know anything about this deal as much as we know about this deal. The same is the content they know about.
Well, certainly, but I mean, the thing is this, is that the argument that we should accept the deal because nobody else knows what's in it is, patently ridiculous. What we should be doing is making sure that all people in all countries know what's in the deal so that we can come together, as, legitimate brothers and sisters in the human family and work in the interest of everybody involved. Deals can be negotiated anywhere by governments keeping their citizens in the dark. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good and fair process.
Mr. Singh, you said that you didn't know about the numbers. Not too many people knows about what was in the deal. And you also came up with some speculative numbers that economically, income-wise, economic benefit, there is no benefit. You came up with some numbers. How can you speculate some numbers even you don't know the deal, that what was in the deal?
Well, the numbers that I'm coming up with are not speculation. They're in fact broadcast by the Globe and Mail. The Globe and Mail is one of Canada's leading newspapers.
You know the facts, what's in the deal or not?
No, the $4.3 billion number is the one that was published by the Globe and Mail just this morning. In fact, it's on the headline of their online page. In addition to that, the Globe and Mail, as well as the CBC, covered the 26,000 job losses by the Unifor. And the Unifor numbers I'm particularly close to because I'm in fact backed. I'm one of the 40 targeted ridings for Unifor in this election. They're supporting me to win. And one of their national executive members, Paulo Ribeiro, lives in my riding. And so I am particularly familiar with the situation in terms of Unifor and what the impact will be as a result of the TPP going through.
Well, let me ask you a straight question. I think somebody asked the question to Mr. Stephen Harper in the morning too, that it is going to affect the value of quota system we already have in place and no party is opposing it. So quota system should go on, but the value of quota system in terms of dairy might go down. And they asked us, Stephen Harper, if he will buy the quota from the farmers, and he said absolutely not. You tell me, what is your stand, that will you support that the government should buy the quota from the farmers or not, if the value of quotas go down?
Well, the thing is this, is that when we talk about the quota system and the amount of milk or dairy or eggs or poultry being produced, if you're importing more into the country, then quite frankly, you're not going to need the same amount, unless of course you start importing people into the country to buy it and consume it. And so this is really a disingenuous statement on behalf of the Prime Minister, if he in fact said it. And so what we are saying in the Democratic Party is that we want to make sure that we preserve the supply management system as it exists, to make sure that we have the continued stability for the agricultural sectors affected in this area. It's important to note that, you know, in rural Canada, unlike urban Canada, we don't have the same kind of economic diversity to support Canadians in their livelihoods. For those areas of the economy that do exist there, we have to make sure that they are stabilized and well maintained, so that the communities that depend on them are able to continue to do so.
So if you form the government, you will maintain the value or the price of the quota system already in place by maintaining the supply and management?
Absolutely, that has always been the NDP's position.
Okay, so when it comes to the manufacturing sector, we manufacture a lot of products and it is based in Ontario. What you will tell those manufacturers that they will have, that government will help to expose them to about 800 million people, and 40% of world GDP is based on that. You think those manufacturers will be happy or not?
I can't speak on behalf of the manufacturers, but I can tell you that the Conservative government has a long stint. Pardon me, Pudgy?
They will have a bigger market or not?
The bigger market is there. The question is whether they're going to be competitive or not. I mean, the market as it exists already prior to the TPP being signed has been very large already. But in fact, the problem that we've had is that the manufacturing sector in Canada has been allowed to, die, frankly, and this is as a fault of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party, during its term in government, is exclusively focused on the oil and gas sector. We know, not from our numbers in the NDP, but numbers generally available, that this government has the worst record on job creation since the Second World War, and in particular for the manufacturing sector, we have a 400,000 job loss, level to deal with. And so the question then becomes, is it going to be better for the manufacturing sector because we have more countries to deal with, or is it in fact going to be worse because the protections for our manufacturing sector are now going to be stripped away, and manufacturing is going to happen in other countries and be shipped here instead of the other way around?
So
what about the agriculture farmers in terms of, like, say, meat producers? They will have access to market like Japan, huge market. World's three trade big partners, USA, Japan, Mexico. We are already dealing with a lot of business with them. If they're exposed to market like Japan, you think the meat producer or agriculture farmers won't benefit from that?
Certainly there'll be a few sectors of the economy that do benefit, but the trouble that we've had with trade deals in the past is that once the trade deal is signed, if it's shown that Canada is to be particularly competitive in a certain area, then what happens is that the other countries, in particular the United States, start closing the door to the market. Softwood lumber would be the best example of this. For years and years and years, and numerous court battles, and after many taxpayers' dollars being sent, in fact, Canada gave up on its softwood lumber sector and trying to get it access and the proper access it deserved under the trade agreements previously signed to the United States. And so what this means is that the trade agreements being signed are being done in bad faith, generally, and what it also means is that Canada and the Canadian government, at least so far, has not been willing to stick up for its industries that are supposed to be benefiting from the trade deal and then, in fact, end up suffering.
Well, let me ask you straightforward. I think you might be thinking that 11 countries without Canada could still sign that deal. If those 11 countries could sign unanimously that deal, didn't we feel as a Canadian or as a Canada left alone from that or not?
Paji, trade deals get signed all over the world, on any given day, and Canada's not a participant to those. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the sky's going to start falling, or the lights are going to go out. We continue to be a fantastic producer of quality products in this country, both on the manufacturing side and the service side, and that's not going to change. I would argue that negotiating deals in secret actually puts that in risk more so than participating in the deal itself. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that any deals signed are in our interest. And in fact, I think that the isolationism argument being put forward by the Conservatives and others is another example of fear-mongering that we've seen generally as a theme from the Conservative Party in this campaign.
So this year we had a largest trade deficit in the history. You think by signing this deal, we can remove that deficit and bring it to surplus or not?
I would argue, in fact, the potential is it's going to make it worse.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead, Parminder.
Okay, I just wanted to know that in coming near future, India and China, they are expected to join this trade deal. And that
no,
is...
they won't be available because these are between the 12 countries.
No, but that
might be a new deal.
Yeah, that might be addition to this deal. And if that happens, would that be affecting Canada only or any other countries as well?
So certainly with an addition of any other country, the conditions under which the deal exists can change. This is no different than what happened in Canada here in North America, in fact. So initially we had the Canada-US free trade deal, and then we had NAFTA, which brought in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so you are able to grow trade deals. You risk, of course, a change in the rules, but also too, there is a potential benefit to bringing in those other markets. And so I can't speculate on what's going to happen with China and India in the future. But I can certainly say that for any trade deals being negotiated in the future, it is my hope and expectation that we would know the details prior to signing.
Okay, Mr. Singh, let's go towards a little bit political side now. Mr. Thomas Mulcair took very clear stand in terms of speaking about niqab and also Bill C-24 and Bill C-51. When he was speaking about niqab, there was a downward trend, especially in the province of Quebec after the French debates. You think before even looking deal, Mr. Mulcair or your NDP party didn't even have a choice other than opposing TPP to bring your numbers up?
These two issues are not at all related. When you talk about issues of human rights, the New Democratic Party has stood firm on these issues, even in the face of public opinion that counters it. If we look at part of the question that you mentioned there, Paji, we talk about Bill C-51. Bill C-51, when it was first introduced, was in fact favored by 82% of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And the New Democratic Party opposed it from the very beginning. It is because we are a party of principle. And so what it means is that you can tell from the approach of the New Democratic Party that we are exclusively focused in these areas on protecting human rights. And in fact, it's not just human rights of, say, in this example, Muslim people that are protected, but in fact, it's the human rights of all people being protected. For those of us in the Sikh community, it's of particular relevance to us also, because maybe 95 to 96% of Canadians can't tell the difference between a Muslim and a Sikh. And so when the Conservative Party starts attacking Muslim people with either the niqab issue or the Barbaric Practices Act, and we can speak about that in a moment as well. In fact, they're attacking the Sikh community by default at the exact same time. Moving on from there, I can tell you that Bill C-51, we oppose that wholeheartedly, and if we form government on the 19th of October, we will be getting rid of it as soon as possible. The same is also true of Bill C-24, which makes basically a whole group of Canadians, second-class Canadians, who can have their citizenship stripped away even if they're born in this country. And so I
so
heartily
you're not in
endorse the New
favor-
Democratic Party and the positions that they've taken on this issue.
So you're not in favor of stripping that citizenship from that terrorist who's in jail and who, after serving his sentence, he should be deported or not?
The fact of the matter is this, is that there's no real restriction on the crime for which you can have your citizenship stripped away. Currently, the Conservatives are mentioning these particular crimes, but the way that the bills are worded makes it, very vague. And so what happens is that you could, under Bill C-51, for example, commit, an act that the government sees as an act of terrorism. For example, writing a university paper on the subject of terrorism, which in fact does not incite terrorism at all, and then they could use Bill C-24 to kick you out of the country for the violation of Bill C-51. This is an absolute tragedy. In addition to that, it begs the question of what is citizenship? For those of us who are born in Canada, certainly we take our citizenship for granted, but we would have the expectation that those of us who got our citizenship by naturalization would enjoy the same rights. I mean, the fact of the matter is this, whether you are born in Canada and get your citizenship by birth, or you get your citizenship through naturalization, you are both able to join the Canadian Armed Forces and take a bullet for your country. So if you're able to die for your nation with the two different types of citizenship, you should be able to have your citizenship dealt with equally in the court of law here in Canada.
So you want to say is a person cannot be charged for the same punishment twice. I mean, for the same crime, he's been charged twice.
Well, there's that aspect of it there, but also too, the question is that these two bills go together to make a very dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. Bill C-51, for example, in the letter and the word of the law, talks about how if you commit any act that in any way destabilizes the economic situation of the nation or a region in the nation, that you in fact could be charged. So what this means is that, by the letter of the law, if you're doing a protest, for example, in downtown Toronto or some other big city in Canada, the government could determine that that is having a negative economic impact and charge you.
Well, they're not talking about economic effect, they're talking about serious crimes, and there are 4 clauses there that basically they are very serious terrorist-related crimes though. Like if you're saying economic benefit or domestic criminal offense, I think Bill C-24 or Bill C-51 don't talk about it.
Most definitely they do, Paji. In fact, it's directly in the wording of the bill itself. Bill C-51 in particular, that is the reason why the various civil rights organizations across Canada are so distinctly opposed to it. Those particular aspects of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that protect the freedom of assembly and freedom of protest and whatnot, peaceful protest, are now at distinct risk, at distinct jeopardy through this bill. And so I beg to differ with you, Paji. I of course respect you highly, but I think that we are in disagreement on this particular issue.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit politics now. There was a time, I think the last time we interviewed you, very three-way tight race in Ontario, and everybody was watching that race. I think whole Canada is watching because the number of seats are at stake, and every party is trying to get more seats from Ontario. And you are also a part of a three-way race. But looking at the last week's number, there is a surge in the poll, especially to the Liberal Party. They are in like mid-40s, and NDP numbers are going down. What is the reason, Mr. Singh, that why NDP numbers are going down in Ontario?
So the numbers in the poll have been very variable, as you said. I think if we check the polls that came out yesterday, you are quite right, the Liberals were up, but 2 days before that, the Conservatives were up. The day before that, the Liberals were up, and if we go back 5 days before that, in fact, it was the tight race that you had mentioned. What it means is that the polls are very highly volatile, and in fact, with 14 days left in an election campaign, there's all kinds of time for changes to happen again. We have to have perspective in this particular election. For us, we're thinking that this is just very little time left in an election period, but that's only because the election has been 78 days long. In fact, the typical election period in Canada by law is 36 days, and so if it were the regular election period, we would be still looking at a full third of the election to go or more. And so, we're quite pleased with where the NDP is doing from a principled policy stand perspective. Certainly we are doing our work to get our numbers up. but I can tell you that, for example, in my riding of Brampton North, we are in solid contention, and it's a race between ourselves and the Conservative Party. And so for those members of my riding who are interested in getting rid of the Stephen Harper Conservatives, they should be placing their vote with me and the NDP.
So if you go at the doors and talk to the people, if the people want a change, are they leaning towards you or the Liberals?
So when we go door to door, and we've been going door to door since the end of December, there is a distinct split in the population as it exists. Those people who are hard rock conservatives are generally staying with the party, and we see that played out in the poll numbers nationally as well. In my riding, though, what's happening is that those people who traditionally voted Liberal are now voting for the NDP. And there's two reasons for this. So the first reason is that they're unhappy with the Liberals and what they've done both federally and at a provincial level. The provincial level, one of the main issues there is the sex ed education curriculum, and they're upset with that. But also, too, they're seeing a very vibrant campaign. So in the past, what would happen, the NDP would not be well organized, and this was even as true as recently as the 2011 federal election campaign.
Even under Jack Layton, you mean?
Yeah, this is absolutely true. So I'll give you an example. None of the ridings in the 2011 campaign, if my memory serves me correct, had their candidates nominated before the election began. In this election, we had 11 of 12 candidates nominated before the election started. And for me, myself, I was nominated back on November 16th in 2014. So the campaign is very different. I mean, in the 2014 provincial election, which just finished up a year ago last June, the NDP candidate did absolutely fantastic. And in that campaign, he had put out approximately 900 signs. I can tell you in our campaign, we've already put out 3,000. We have another 400 on order, and people are seeing that effect. They see that, they're always wanted to vote NDP. They've been NDP in their heart, and now they, want to be able to vote NDP, and they feel comfortable doing so. But Baji, I'm the NDP candidate, so don't take my word for it. Let's try to look at some objective measures, because we do have them. In that same provincial election, the large unions, including Unifor, among other organizations, backed the Liberal Party to try to push out the Conservatives. And that was not that long ago. Those same organizations are now all supporting me. So in the same way that in our campaign we are seeing a change on the ground, so too are the other large organizations in the riding seeing that very same change on the ground. And it is for this reason, in fact, that the Unifor executive and other volunteers from their union were in my campaign office just yesterday, working the whole day volunteering for us.
So do you think that the provincial issues would be affecting the federal politics here?
This always happens, and the reason for it is because many people, just due to their own level of understanding, don't know the difference between federal and provincial election issues. What we do when we're canvassing door to door, we try to make sure that we educate people as to what the different issues are. We make sure that we record their concerns and issues when they're being issued, or rather being addressed by a different level of government, say for example provincial or municipal, and then we share that information with our provincial municipal colleagues so that those residents who have those concerns can have their issues addressed.
By looking at the current scenario, looking at the polls or looking at the current environment, you believe your party leader has to change some policy issues or not? He's going to stick to the policies, he's not going to major changes in the next 2 weeks to bring your poll numbers up?
Paji, I have no crystal ball. Yesterday there was no TP, and today there is a TPP. So elections change very, very quickly. I would argue that the New Democratic Party is not going to change insofar as we're going to stand up for people's rights, stand up for people's jobs, we're going to work for job creation, we're going to make sure that the quality of life for all Canadians improves, and whichever issue comes along on any day of the election remaining will be viewed through that lens. And so to that end, I'm very proud of the positions that we've taken in the New Democratic Party, and I believe that we have the most to offer Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
At the end, what you want to tell to our listeners, what message you want to give it to them about yourself and your party?
So in my candidacy, we have the ability to have a member of parliament that is very deeply concerned about the issues affecting Brampton North. To that end, I'm going to bring all of my qualifications, including the 4 university degrees I have and the experience that I have running a business that has almost 500 employees to you, meaning that all this expertise and experience will be used to raise your issues in Ottawa. In addition to that, when we talk about the importance of an MP, we often give them a lot of importance because there's only one in a riding. But the fact of the matter is 50% of the work an MP does is in Ottawa. And in Ottawa, 50% of the national media is French. And so while I speak, read, and write English, I also speak, read, and write French. And what this means is that for those residents of Brampton North, you will have an MP in me who is going to be able to double the audience and double the number of people who are going to be able to learn about the challenges that we face in our riding and who are going to be able to help us find solutions. To that end, Paji, I invite anyone who's interested in the campaign to come visit us at our office at 2250 Beauvais Drive East. We're in Unit 109. And also they can call us at 905-595-5122, or they can look us up on the internet at www.martinsingh.ca.
Mr. Singh, it was very informative. It was our pleasure to have you in our studio. Thank you very much for joining us.
The pleasure was all mine, Paji. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
Thank you.